All that I do and think is only a specimen of my potential. Man is more general than his life and his acts. He is like a preview for more eventualities than he can know. Mr. Testy says, "My potential never abandons me." By Valerie, Monsieur Testy. For a being who is attached to life only by such a tenuous bond, liberty takes a sense so gaping and so ultimate that it can no longer provide him shelter. It is that which casts over his becoming a sense of complete spectacular futility, a terminal way in which to be a spectator of the world, himself included. In the eternal Sunday of his existence, the Bloom's interest still lies in never draining out the object, and that is why he himself is the man without interest. In the sense that we do not achieve importance in our own eyes, but also in the sense that the bourgeois category of interest cannot strictly account for any of our acts. Disinterest is no longer an expression of an individual idealism, but a mass phenomenon. Assuredly, man is something that has surpassed itself. All those who love their virtues have perished by them.
Each is most estranged from himself. The fundamental experience of the bloom is that of its own transcendence by rapport with itself. But that experience, in spite of its beautiful sound, is primarily that of a powerlessness, of an absolute suffering. If we keep that view of ourselves, we are not subjects, complete, autonomous beings, sovereign to its allegiance. We evolve in a space that is entirely controlled, entirely occupied by the spectacle. And then it notes the appendix, but the appendix part for the spectacle is like
Really long.
7 pages long, so you should read that yourself. On one hand, and by biopower on the other, which is also noted but really long. And what is so terrible about this control, about this occupation that they force us to endure, is that it is not something we might rebel against in a definitive gesture of rupture, but with which we can only compose strategically. The regime of power under which we live does not at all resemble the mechanisms of restriction, of purely repressive coercion, that could not have circulated under the administrative monarchies, the expired concept of which lived under a recent date even within biopolitical democracies. These mechanisms are the only enemy recognized by revolutionary movements. The contemporary form of domination is, on the contrary, essentially productive. On one hand, it rules the manifestations of our existence, the spectacle. On the other hand, it manages the conditions of the spectacle, biopower. The spectacle is the power that wants you to talk, that wants you to be someone. Biopower is the benevolent power, full of the solicitude of a shepherd for his flock, the power that wants the salute of its subjects, the power that wants you to live. Held in the vice that it is simultaneously all-encompassing and individual, ripening in a double constraint that annihilated us in the same act as it brought us into existence, most of us adopt a sort of political and hopeless nature to feign internal death, and like the captive before the grand inquisitor, keep silent. In subtracting themselves from all positivity, these specters steal from productive power that very thing upon which it could be exerted, themselves. Their desire not to live is all that gives them strength to oppose a power that claims to make them live. In doing so, they remain in the bloom, usually burying themselves therein. The bloom therefore signifies this, that we do not belong to ourselves, that this world is not our world, that it is not only in its totality that it stands opposite us, but in the fact that it's alien to us even in its most intimate details. This alienness would be pleasant if it could implicate an exteriority of principle between it and us. But it does nothing of the sort. Our alienness to the world is such that the alien is in us, so that in the world of authoritarian merchandise we will regularly become alien to ourselves. The ring of situations where we are forced to watch ourselves act, to contemplate the action of an ego in which we do not recognize ourselves, henceforth closes in and besieges us even in what bourgeoisie society still calls intimacy. The other possesses us. It is this disassociated body, a simple peripheral artifact in the hands of biopower. It is our brutal desire to survive in the intolerable grind of minuscule subjections, of granulated pressures that constricts us tighter and tighter. It is the entirety of calculations, of humiliations, the petty-mindedness, the entirety of tactics we must deploy. All of this constitutes the mechanical objective to which we conform internally. The other is the economy in us. The bloom also signifies this, that each knows that he for one is not himself. Even if, momentarily, we are able to have the opposite impression in front of something or other, it is most often anonymously. We keep in our core the sentiment of an inauthentic existence, of an artificial life. The internal presence of the other is established at all levels of our conscious. It is a minor and constant loss of being, a progressive draining, a little death continually distributed. In spite of this, we persist in assuming the exterior hypothesis for our identity in ourselves. We play at being the subject. A shame attaches to this rendering and grows with it. So we attempt evasion. We project ourselves ever more violently outside, as far as possible from this dreadful interior tension. It is necessary that none of this shows to stick to our social identity and remain foreign to our foreignness. Keep up a good face before the domain of ruins.
This lie in each of our actions. That is the essential point. It is no longer time to make literature with various combinations of disaster. Up until now, too much has been written and not enough thought about the bloom. Ens realismum. And there's an appendix note which says, Ens realismum. Wait, going over here. Ens realismum is Latin, the most real being, considered a term for God. Ens realismum reflects the belief that reality, like goodness, exists in degrees, and that therefore a limiting, ultimately real entity must exist. In Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, he uses transcendental logic to demonstrate the necessity of the existence of such a being, but reminds the reader that this supreme being does not necessarily adhere to the concept of God. Ens realismum. The Ptolemaic, and there's a note in the appendix that says, the Ptolemaic, I think Ptolemy is like silent or something, a French word that can refer to either the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal family that ruled the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt, or to Claudius Ptolemy, and his theory that the earth is immobile at the center of the universe. The Ptolemaic, when looking around himself, finds only two phenomenons, sociology and emptiness. That is the necessary starting point, not that which we believe to be sociology, but that which we intimately experience as a lack, because that is what is most real, the ens realismum. The bloom does not signify that we would be failing subjects in regard to the superb sufficiency of the classic subject. Instead, it reveals that at the base of human existence there is a principle of incompleteness, a radical insufficiency. That what we are is precisely that failure, which can, if it pleases, designate itself the mask of the subject. Indeed, we are nothing but the nothing around which revolves the movement of our ideas, our experiences, our miseries, and our sensations. Indeed, we are the empty axis of that wordless well, an axis that only exists via itself, if not for the reason that every circle possesses a center. But what ongoing deficiency comprehends itself as the ultimate positivity, which expresses itself thus: I am the intermediary between that which I am and that which I am not. And that was that which I am not. The bloom is very much this type of intermediary, but it is a passive intermediary, the witness of its own desubjectivization, of its interminable becoming other. It regains that original difference of knowing that we are not what we are, that no predicate can exhaust our power. Incompleteness is the mode of being of all who stay. Sorry, 1 second.